Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Meeting to order. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I'll ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session is being held on March 1st, 2018 at 5:00 p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a presentation on the community survey. At 6:00 p.m. is the North Hoop linkage study by Mark. Roll call. Townsend, McKiernan,
Here.
Mugia, Johnson, here. Kane, Markley, Walters, here. Philbrook,
here.
Bynum,
Here.
Burrows,
Here.
Alvey.
Here. Tonight we'll hear a presentation on the community survey. I'll turn it over to Administrator Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. Commission, tonight we're pleased to bring forward our initial findings that are coming back on the survey. This is the third survey we've done in consecutive fashion. We've modified from some when we started back in 2014, then we decided to put them on a 2-year cycle going into 16 and now 18, which allows us to start to get some comparable data back to kind of show some patterns of what we're doing with things. And again, this year we hired ETC to come forward and stay consistent with the survey they've done. Survey was led by the Finance Department, and I will turn this over to Kathleen Von Anchen, our CFO, and let her introduce our presentation this evening.
So this evening we have with us Chris Tatham with the ETC Institute to present the preliminary 2018 community survey results for Wyandotte County. In addition to the current survey, Chris and his team at ETC have also assisted Wyandotte the Unified Government with completing a community survey during 2016 and 2014 and back in 2000. So sitting with Chris is also Mike Grimm with the UG's Research Division of the Finance Department, who was instrumental in getting the survey completed, working closely with Chris. And Mike has been the lead on this project. The survey asks questions regarding satisfaction with various governments, government services, and the quality of life in the county. The results of the survey will be used as part of our upcoming budgeting process to prioritize spending, and it's also will be used to form the future initiatives related to SOAR. So at this point, I'd like to let Chris take it over from here.
It's great to be here. Great to see everyone, Mayor, Commissioners. Good to be back. If you're new and you don't know much about ETC Institute, we're based here in the Kansas City area. We now have offices in several places around the country, and we've actually started doing work in countries like Ethiopia and India to help them use some of these same techniques to make better decisions based on what their residents and their stakeholders need. Over the past, I guess, 2 decades, this is, I guess, just in the past few years, we've surveyed over 2 million people in the United States. So some of my comments tonight are just going to be how things have changed and what's going on nationally. And it's really based on the fact that I've been doing this about 25 years. Our firm's been doing it for 35 years. It was actually started by my parents. And we maintain some of the best databases for interpreting what results mean. As far as tonight, I'm just going to walk you through really what we found to date. The survey's pretty much completed at this point in time. We haven't finished all of the analysis, but the results won't change much, at least the overall results. So I'll walk you through the major categories of questions, give you what we found, and certainly if there's questions, I'll try to answer them while we're here this evening. And follow up to this, if there's additional information or analysis you'd like, we'd be happy to include that as we wrap up the reports. I think most of you are familiar with this purpose for doing the survey. We actually did a survey a few years ago to find out how many people in a community actually show up to public meetings. In a national survey, 7% of respondents said they'd been to a public meeting in the last year. And you think, wow, that sounds like it's high. When we did a follow-up question, we found out people really overstated how recently they'd been. It's really about 3% of people go to a public meeting in any given year. And of those 3%, the number one reason they go is to get rewards and recognition or to see people get rewards and recognition. Number 2 is they don't like what's being done. Or number 3, they want to change how you do things. The average person who's satisfied or frankly is just busy with their life doesn't show up. So without a tool like this, sometimes it's hard to think or know what the average resident thinks. And it doesn't mean public processes and input processes aren't important. They're very, very important, but this helps you balance a lot of the decision to make sure that the average person's input is incorporated into your decision. We also use this to help set budget priorities and really see how things are changing over time. And one of the nice things is these results suggest that you're moving in the right direction from the last time that I was here. As far as the methodology, it's a large sample. It's set up so that each of the commission districts is statistically represented. Our goal is to get at least 300 surveys per district. We also target specific neighborhood areas as well. And this year, at the time these surveys were finished, we had completed a little over 2,100 surveys. When we're all finished, we'll have over 2,400 surveys. But statistically, the results I share won't be more than 1% or 2% different than what you see today. As far as the distribution, you can see this is the current distribution, and you can see it's very even. So one district isn't, counting more than another. We also looked at the demographics of the current sample with regard to race, Hispanic ancestry, age, and other factors, and it looks very good. So we feel like this is really the results I share with you today are representative, though they're not final. As far as the things that we took a look at, the first set of questions on the survey looks at your neighborhood and community services, and you can see we look at things like fire, ambulance, police. I won't read the entire list to you, but as you go through the report, you'll see things that are in blue. That typically means good ratings, very satisfied, satisfied. The off-white is a neutral, or excuse me, the white is a neutral response, and people don't actually say I'm neutral. That basically is a rating of a 3 on a 5-point scale. So in other words, when we ask people to rate these items, they're giving a scale response of 1 to 5. And so if they say 3, really means okay. We've done research to see what people means. They're not upset, they're not really happy, you're doing all right. But if they give us a negative response, that's what you see there in red. And you'll see the areas that have some of the most negativity are maintenance of streets and code enforcement. Each have over 30% of the respondents giving negative ratings. But you'll notice your fire, your public safety service, ambulance, police, all of those rate very, very highly, with over 25% of folks giving ratings of 5 on a 5-point scale. So very, very strong in the public safety side of the house. When we look at how things have changed from the last survey, you'll see a few things have stayed about the same, but I flagged the ones that are statistically different. You'll take a look at police services. You've now gone from 69 to 72, and if you look where you were when we did the first survey, you're up almost 10 points over the past decade or so, which is great. Parks and recreation facilities, see it went up from the last survey, and you see how much it's increased from when we did the first survey back in 2000. Stormwater, you can see significant improvements. municipal courts, communication, which was one of your high priorities last time, has gone up significantly. And streets, look at how much that's improved, and that was your #1 priority last time around. So it really shows that you're doing things that are important to residents and they're noticing that. Your solid waste, trash collection, and recycling are the two areas that we've seen sort of a decrease from when we did the last survey. As far as the top priorities, we then asked folks, of all these items, what's the most important? And streets is still the #1. You got a ways to go there. That's the one that has the most dissatisfaction, but you've made lots of progress. So that's not a cheap area to move in the right direction, so you're certainly doing it. Code enforcement, police, and communication kind of round out the top 4, but you'll see the percentage of people who pick streets as a top choice is almost as much as the top 4 choices for any other service. And so it's really important when you see so many folks picking that. So you're moving in the right direction, but there's still opportunities to do better. And one of the things I put here was just to share with you what the priorities were by district. And you'll see in all 8 districts, maintenance of city streets is the #1 neighborhood and community level service. You see overall code enforcement was next, but you'll see it kind of varies where you're at. Communication, police, stormwater also made the list in some areas. Police services was 3rd overall, but you can see generally most of the same sets of services are in the top 3 or 4 in all districts, even though in some cases one might be 2nd and another place it might be 4th. The overall priorities are generally pretty similar. When we looked at this as far as the opportunities to do better, what we take a look at is not just how important people say it is, but also how well you're doing. The reason this is important is, let's say that everybody in Wyandotte County was dissatisfied with the service. Well, if nobody cared about it, you probably shouldn't spend billions of dollars in that area. On the other hand, if something's really important to folks and they're not satisfied, that's likely to be one of your top priorities. So what we look at is most important, how many people pick that, and we also look at the satisfaction percentage, and we have an equation to identify where you're likely to have the most return on investment. And this can be in your messaging, it can be in actual spending, but just letting folks know that you care and own the issue. And you can see the top 3 are streets. It has a 0.39 rating, which is almost double code enforcement and communication. And this doesn't mean the other areas aren't important, but if you're going to continue moving forward, streets is going to give you the highest return as far as improved service areas. And I know that's an expensive one to do, but right now that's the one that residents care a lot about, and there's also the most dissatisfaction with it. And this is for those of you, I should have pointed out, if you're a left brain learner and you like a list, if anyone here in the commissions are right brain and likes a nice picture, this is the same information that you'll have in the report. And what it does is show from left to right how important things are. So things on the right side are more important than average. And as you go from the bottom to top, that's the satisfaction. So things on the bottom half have lower satisfaction ratings, and that's where you'll see streets, code enforcement, communication are down there in the bottom left. And so that's kind of really give you a sense for if you're prioritizing investments, prioritizing your messages to the public, those are the places you're going to get the most return on investment when it comes to neighborhood and community services. Shifting to county level services, you can see again we have a number of services that were assessed. Park, Sheriff Office, the Election Office were rated the highest. You can see services for developmental disabilities, transportation, senior transportation. A lot of these services people, frankly, are not that familiar with, and that's why you tend to see a lot more of the 3 ratings. So there's not a lot of dissatisfaction here, but at the same time, people may not know what you're really doing or have a real strong opinion about it, which is why you have so many 3 ratings. You will notice, though, motor vehicle registration, 25%, and the customer service at 21% were 2 of the areas that had some of the highest levels of dissatisfaction. But what's great is those are 2 of the areas you've made the most improvement over the last 2 years. In fact, when you look at the changes from 2 years ago, or really over the last couple of years, you'll see the election office is up significantly, the community elections is up, motor vehicle registration, which you just saw had some of the highest dissatisfactions, actually made some of the, more than a 10% improvement in satisfaction. The treasurer's office is up significantly, and the customer service is also rebounded, which is great. And there were no significant decreases either. So all in all, both on the neighborhood and also on the county level services, you're definitely moving in the right direction. When we did the analysis here to identify the top priorities, you'll see that motor vehicle registration is near the top, and that's not uncommon to be near the top because it's a service that so many people use. And since there is the most dissatisfaction, people are probably paying a little more attention to that. But like I said, you're moving in the right direction. Aging services, developmental disabilities, your parks and senior transportation kind of round out the top issues. But there's not just one item that stands head and shoulders above the others like streets does on the neighborhood and community level services. When we look at the priorities overall, you'll see number one was motor vehicle registration, but you see in a couple districts, developmental disabilities or aging services ranked as number one. You can see motor vehicle registration was in most of the areas, but not all. But you can see parks is fourth overall, but pretty scattered among most of the different areas. Senior transportation was also scattered, but in many of the districts. But you can see there's a little more difference when it comes to county level service priorities compared to neighborhood level service priorities, where they're generally the same throughout the county. And when we did the analysis overall, you'll see services for developmental disabilities, aging services, senior transportation, and motor vehicle registration were in the top of the list. Those are 4 of the 5 most important, and you can see most of them have lower ratings. The one difference is motor vehicle registration is so important to people that even though you're doing well, people want you to keep focusing on, and so there's opportunities to do even better because your satisfaction rating still, though gotten higher, it's still at 49%, so it can get better. And you can see that on this chart. If you're looking at the things in the bottom right, you'll see developmental disability services, senior transportation, aging services, and public health are in the bottom right. And motor vehicle registration is just so important. That's one of the reasons it's important to keep focusing on that as you move forward. As far as overall priorities, maintenance of streets, when we said, okay, of all the county, all the neighborhood and community services, we then had folks say, well, which of these are the most important to you? And you'll notice that the neighborhood and community services, 3 of the top 4 are in that area. Streets, police, and codes are at the top of the list. And then you can see motor vehicle registration is 4th. And then you have really almost everything else is more or less statistically equal. And so that really depends and shows you how diverse the needs are of the community. But again, the emphasis on streets is certainly there. One of the things I thought was great is when I was here last time, we had seen some decrease in the overall perceptions of the county, but since 2016, we've seen some significant rebounds in several areas. You see perceptions of quality of life is up 4% from 2016. Your ways you're managing your growth and development's up 3%. The overall quality of city and county services is actually up 6% compared to 2 years ago. The image of the county has improved. Feelings of safety is up a little bit. The appearance is up. And then the overall value for taxes is also improved. So all in all, I know there were some concerns when I was here last time that things had decreased. It seems that you've turned the corner around and are back to moving in the right direction. As far as some of the specific things that we looked at in the survey, one of was just to drill into public safety issues and try to better understand what was going on there. And you can see here's the trends over the last 3 times we've done the survey. Fire department issues, response times to emergency calls, to fires, you can see has not changed a whole lot. In fact, for the most part, there haven't been many statistically significant shifts for some of the specific aspects of public safety. You can see, though, that the overall efforts to prevent crime has trended a little bit down. And that's usually not a function necessarily of crime itself. It's also perceptions, education. Sometimes what can happen is media stories and things like that can cause people to feel less safe. And so sometimes we've found that the strategies to address concerns about crime prevention are actually a public education effort. When we look at the top priorities, you can see that the efforts to prevent crimes at the top of the list. Close second is visibility of police in neighborhoods, and you'll notice that that's actually the one that has the most first choices, but those are clearly kind of your top 2 choices, followed by visibility of code enforcement in neighborhoods, animal control, and police and retail areas kind of our second tier of responses. And when we did the analysis, you can see the top 2 are the overall efforts to prevent crime, and then the visibility of code enforcement in neighborhoods, followed by animal control and visibility. So there's not just one thing to do, there's several different things to do, and that's where some of the analysis that we're going to provide by neighborhoods may help you target your efforts in different parts of the county to get the most return on your investment. And when it comes to maintenance issues, you can see here there's been progress in a number of the areas. Snow removal on neighborhood streets. I know we didn't have a whole lot of snow this year. That may have helped a little bit. but that's up significantly. More importantly, you can see the maintenance of street signs and traffic signals rebounded in a great way. You can see the maintenance of your major streets is up. And some of these items take a long time to turn. In fact, I've been in a number of communities where they've had maintenance of streets as their top issue. And as they invest in the street, sometimes the ratings tend to go down because streets start getting torn up, traffic starts getting a problem. So sometimes while you're making the investments, you don't initially see all the returns. So the fact that we've seen a positive movement pretty much in most areas of maintenance suggests that you're doing a good job of managing it. And actually, sometimes when you're really tearing things up, it's not even the maintenance itself, it's the impact it has on neighbors. I know like in the city of Olathe, they've seen their ratings go down sometimes when they do a neighborhood street removal or a restoration project. And people, when it's all done, like the street, but they're mad at the company for blocking their driveways and things like that. So sometimes really understanding where the project went and how people respond, and that's where the mapping and the fact that you have such a large sample will probably help you understand some of this detail a little bit more. And you can see in this case, neighborhood streets is the number one thing at 42%. Closely behind that, you can see is major streets, and it's kind of the cleanliness, sidewalks and neighborhood snow removal are all kind of a second tier, but taking care of neighborhoods is clearly at the top of the list for folks in the county. And you can see that all of those items I just mentioned are generally in the area that we call, the most significant opportunities for improvement in red, but you'll see the maintenance of streets and neighborhoods as the highest important satisfaction rating, and so that's probably where you're going to hit the greatest return on investment when it comes to street improvements. On the code enforcement side, you might have noticed earlier there wasn't really a dramatic increase overall in code enforcement, but I think your specific things you're doing on code enforcement are being noticed. And sometimes it takes a while because people can start using a term of code enforcement just to blame everything that's wrong in the city, and they don't really understand what code enforcement is, but that term can be negative. But when we actually looked at the specific things that you're doing, you're making really good progress in a number of areas. And so it might be you need to link what you're doing with the term code enforcement, even how you do your education and the information. But check this out. You look at the removal of inoperable and junk cars. That's up 9% just over the last 4 years. Maintenance of neighborhood residential property is up 6% compared to just 2 years ago. Enforcement of cleanup of trash in neighborhoods is up 8%. The mowing and trimming of neighborhoods is up 12%. Enforcement of business property maintenance is up long-term 5% from last time, 7% from 4 years ago. Mowing and trimming citywide's up 8%, and the cleanup of trash citywide's up 4% from just 2 years ago. So you have made tremendous improvement in code enforcement. So even though the overall rating hasn't changed, I think it shows that the specific efforts you are doing are being noticed, and it may take a while before people start really understanding what the general term code enforcement really means doing all of these things. So great job in this arena. Things that people care the most about, cleaning up trash citywide, 51% of the folks hit that. And I know some communities have relied on volunteers. This has been a way to reach out to the community. Sometimes it's hard to clean up the whole community, but I know some communities that have had challenges with the trash effort have reached out to volunteer groups and things like that in the community to assist with this to help move it forward. But whatever you're doing, you come back here, 8% in just 2 years. You're definitely doing something right when it comes up to the cleanup of trash and things like that. Overall, you can see you still need to work in all the areas, so you're moving in the right direction, but you can see that in most cases there's still opportunities to do better, given that the satisfaction ratings in most areas are below 50%. In fact, they're all below 50%, so that's one of the reasons you see so much red on this. So code enforcement, you're moving in the right direction, but still opportunities to do better. On the Parks and Recreation side, you can see again here, not a lot of significant changes from 2 years ago. There have been some decreases. If you look back to 2014, programs for seniors has dropped from where it was at 34%. It's been the same from 2016. Swimming pools, you can see, dropped from 32 to 24. But we've also seen, as far as the number of outdoor athletic fields, that's actually up 5% over the last 4 years, and most of the other items are statistically about the same as where they were before. And when it comes to opportunities to do better, the number one thing that people care about are your biking and walking trails at 33%, followed by your taking care of your parks and equipment at 30%. But again, there's not just one item. You can see if you look at the percentages between 23 and 33, you've got 5 different things. And so that means having a diverse response. There's not just one simple thing to do. But when we did do the analysis, the places you'll get some of the biggest return as far as infrastructure on parks and recreation will be from your walking and biking trails and your pools, and also continued maintenance of your parks and equipment. On the programming side, it's going to be youth programs and senior programs are the 2 areas to take a look at. Some of the other things that we took a look at in the survey, just to let you know, and these aren't necessarily your performance questions, but they're some of the attitudes about issues you're looking at. One of which is just how people get information. You can see local television at 59%, the top story. And unfortunately, that means that you're responding to 15-second stories about sensational things. And that's why sometimes something like crime prevention can be such a concern for folks, because they're getting a lot of information from the media that's on TV. Your citizen newsletter, take advantage of that. That's actually the #2 source of information. Social media, Facebook is 3rd, local newspapers is 4th, and UG website's got about 24%, which is good, but anymore, most communities are having about 1/3 of their residents rely on their website. So there is opportunities to do better. And that could even be the demographics of the community that are driving it being slightly lower usage, given the demographics that exist here.
We have a question first.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so on that local television question, how was that worded?
It's listed as local television.
It just says local television. Oh. Well, so that's not very helpful because we have UGTV.
Well, we have that, yeah, so we'll
you have it separated. Okay, so that's just UGTV
19%
is separate.
Yeah.
Where does it say?
It's
UGTV. I see it
yeah.
about halfway down. Okay, channel 2. Only 19%? Darn. Seems like there's more patients coming in than that if you're watching it.
Another thing that we're tracking, we'll actually prepare some maps so you can actually see where the greatest concerns exist. We actually asked people whether something was a major or minor problem where the area where they live, and you can see crime, drugs, the percentage reporting it as a problem is rather significant. So you do have a number, 34% identified crime as a major problem, 41% said that drugs were a major problem. So these are things that hopefully the mapping that we do will help you pinpoint and see where they are. But you can see there's a significant number of folks in the county who are reporting different issues or concerns. The nice thing is we ask folks the stormwater question. I know one of the things you're trying to assess is, do people actually think it's important to do this? Well, without a doubt they do. We ask people how important they think it is to manage stormwater runoff to protect quality of water in lakes and streams. A whopping 52% didn't just say it's important, but said it's very important. And that's an intense positive response to that. If you add on the other 31%, you've got 83 or more than 8 out of 10 folks that think this is important. Only 4% said it's not important. So it's a 20-to-1 ratio that think this is something important to do. We then asked folks how you should pay for stormwater fees, and you see over half thought the people who generate more should pay more. You can see everybody paying the same was at 15%. 32% have no idea what that really means, but you can see a majority at least thought those who generate more should pay more. We also asked people how supportive they would be of continuing the public safety, streets, and infrastructure tax, and very strong support here. 45% very supportive, just 10% not supportive. So you've already got, those groups tend to be solid in their answers, so you have a very, very good opportunity here picking the right projects and things like that, that this would be reapproved or continued by the voters at 45%. You can't count on the 31% that are somewhat, they just have done enough of these surveys, but that means you don't have to win a lot of the somewhat supporters to move it forward. So you can pretty much usually bank on most of the very supportive folks to actually go to the polls and vote yes. We also asked questions about if the cost of trash service remained the same and carts were provided, how supportive would you be using a cart-based system? And you'll see 63% said they'd be very or somewhat supported. Only 11% said not supported. But we did this with Olathe a few years ago, and all 11% of the people who didn't like it showed up to every single meeting. So it's just, but since Olathe went to its cart service, they've seen a 20% improvement in satisfaction because at the end of the day, sometimes people are used to what they have and they don't like change, but it's actually improved their satisfaction to being among the very best in the nation as a result of the change. So that's a lot of information. I know I've dumped on you in a half hour. I know there's some time for questions, so I wanted to make sure you had time to ask them. But just kind of summarizing things, overall, the last few years, you're definitely moving in the right direction. You have a lot to be proud of as a county, especially when you look back to 2000. But just in the last 2 years, we've seen significant improvements in many areas. Your streets, code enforcement, and communication, which were really your top issues last time, have all improved significantly. And that really shows me that you're paying attention to resident concerns. You're investing in communicating what residents need to know and the things that they care the most about. Some of the most notable are listed there. I won't read the whole list to you, but you can see you've got a lot of things that have improved, and really not many significant decreases. The only real areas that I flagged for you from last time were related to your solid waste, recycling, and trash services. When it looks for priorities, streets is #1 overall. Code enforcement, communication continue to be in the top list. And then you can see for county services, developmental disabilities, aging, senior, transportation, motor vehicle registration, and health department services kind of round those out. But overall, the top 3 are streets, codes, and your public safety issues. When it comes to next steps, we should be finishing up the survey really in the next few days. We plan to have all the surveys done next week. We'll have the draft report to the county leadership probably within a couple weeks. And from there, we'll develop individual reports that show the results for each of your districts so you can actually see how the residents that you're serving and accountable to actually think about the priorities overall. And with that, I don't know if there's any questions or anything, but I've tried to leave some time so you could ask some if you had any.
Yes, Commissioner Bynum.
I have a question. Did the respondents of the survey tell you their age? And if they did, do you have that breakdown?
Didn't present it tonight, but it's about 20%, and it's very nicely distributed. And but we have about a fifth who are over 65, a fifth who are 54 or 55 to 64, a fifth are 45 to 54, a fifth are 35 to 44, and about a fifth are 18 to 34. So
okay.
It's nicely distributed.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, if we could go to topic 2, county level services. Question 3, satisfaction with county services. Yes, that's it. So I noticed that if we start, let's say, at the district attorney's office, county appraiser's office services, area agency on aging, etc., it would seem to me that for those who are accessing those services, they would tend to be very high need, and so it would seem to me that you would expect those to be rated lower because the need is so great. Is that is that accurate? And does that tend to drive those lower?
Sometimes it can, but you'll see, senior transportation and developmental disabilities were also really important. So a lot of people pick those, whether or not there's that many people using developmental disabilities. I doubt that that's one of your widest used services. So sometimes it's a matter of people being aware of what's out there, what they talk to. I do know that oftentimes the district attorney's office is used by fewer folks, but what can happen with the district attorney's office is just depending on where you are. Sometimes the district attorney office is very visible to folks and people have lots of opinions about it. So the fact that you see a lot of neutral on here or okays means that people aren't having really great experiences, but they're not upset about it either. And so that's an okay place to be. You obviously want to increase the overall satisfaction, but what's nice here is if you actually look at the ratio of satisfaction to dissatisfaction, across the board, in most cases, you have more satisfaction than dissatisfaction. In a lot of cases, it's 2 to 1 or greater being satisfied. So you lean favorably in all of these. But as I pointed out, motor vehicle registration and customer service, which were 2 of the areas rated with the highest dissatisfaction, you actually made some of the greatest improvement. You'll see motor vehicle registration was up 11 points and customer service is up 4 points from the last survey. So you're definitely doing some things right.
So let me ask you, compared to other municipalities that you would ask the similar questions, would these results be consistent?
They're as far as the distribution of having more neutrals, they're definitely similar. As far as if you look at Johnson County, you'll have more people giving ratings of 3 for some of these services than you will things like libraries or county parks, because people tend to be more opinionated about those because they tend to use them. And you can see even those you'll have in the 30s, but across the board as you work your way down, a lot of times it is a function of usage that impacts people's perceptions.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. We have a 311 system. Does any of your information correlate or tie into our 311?
In what regard?
Utilizing information that comes into 311 community needs to report issues within their neighborhoods and countywide. Is there a cross marriage in any of that information at all?
We haven't done that. I mean, one of the things that we could take a look at, we will have the address of respondents, so it's possible that we could take a look if any of the respondents had used it, that sort of thing. We didn't use 311 data, though, to pull our sample, if that's what you're asking.
I'm new to the commission, so I don't know how long our 311 has been out there, but I would think that the reporting process of 311 identifies specifically what the issues are and be able to follow up with those individuals to determine the level of service or satisfaction might help even shed a little more light moving forward.
Sure. It's not uncommon when you do have some of those to do perhaps a post-contact survey with folks immediately after they interact with you. Sometimes that's the next stage, and that will help you get more specific feedback from folks about how they were treated. For a good example is the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. They've been doing for almost 20 years a follow-up survey. They just contact 100 people who contact them every month, and then they ask them what they thought about it, and then they tie all the information about what was the work order, what was the project, where was it, and then they actually even know who talked to them on the phone. And then they use that to basically assess their customer service and understand, are people more upset when there's a sinkhole somewhere, or is it when they have backups in their home? And that sometimes helps you understand if customer service ratings are good or bad. Are they tied to certain types of interactions that people might have? But we don't have that from this data. It's not that specific.
Well, I think it gives us an opportunity to reflect back to the public the customer service aspect and the impression that they get from their government, their local government, in the communication and the concern and satisfaction with not only being heard, but the issue being addressed. And it might help us correlate those numbers a little even to a higher percentage of satisfaction. I was just, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner McKiernan.
I just want to go back real briefly to the code enforcement, and I always appreciate these data, and of course I'll look at these in much greater detail when we get the full report. But I think this is a lesson for all of us exactly to say that in the area of code enforcement, although we are far from where we want to be, we have made demonstrable progress. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, that when we identify a priority and when we assign specific and thoughtful funding to it, and when our staff embraces that priority, as they've done in the SOAR initiative, we can absolutely make positive improvements and progress on issues that are of great importance to our citizens. So I think we should take some measure of satisfaction, although we are not where we want to be. We are making progress, and it's been systematic and methodical on the part of mainly our staff in embracing SOAR and going after this. And so I think that is a wonderful testament to what we can do.
We were just having that same side conversation over here. 4% doesn't seem like a lot, but the fact that we're seeing consistent increase in all of these areas shows it isn't just some weird statistical anomaly. This is real progress, and if we could keep up this level of progress year over year on our priority areas, that's pretty incredible. Yay.
What I like to do is put in nature. Sometimes you'll have, when you look at these in percentages, you think of the population of the county. If you go up 8,000 and you have 150,000, that's 12,000 more people that are satisfied that weren't satisfied just 2 years ago. And so it doesn't seem like big numbers, but it's lots of people.
Yeah.
If there are no further comments or questions, we thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. All right, next we have a presentation on the North Loop linkages study by Mid-America Regional Council. Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a topic that we've had some discussion with the Commission as we've had the opportunity to allow Mark to continue their study where they're looking at changing the highway structure and such as it moves through downtown Kansas City, Missouri. They finished up some of their work earlier this week, and they're here this evening. I'm going to turn this over to Rob Richardson, our Director of Planning, who has been on point and working with them as they've been going through this process to introduce it, and then go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Bach. With me tonight is Ron Shakovitz with Burdens McDonald. They're the consultant working for the Mid-America Regional Council on this project. It's considering alternatives for how to address I-70 and 670 as they go through downtown Kansas City, Missouri, and the impacts they have well beyond that area. Obviously, it's a very important corridor. And I'm going to turn it over to Ron to let him go through the presentation here, and at the end, he has some simulation models that kind of show you how the traffic would move under certain circumstances in the future. But with that, one additional thing. After the presentation, if you have comments beyond what you would say here, if you get those to Mr. Bach so we can get those into the process with the study team. And then there will be some public meeting opportunities for the public coming up. Those meeting dates are not set, but we will have them out in e-news when they're available.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. On behalf of Mid-America Regional Council, Missouri Department of Transportation, and Kansas City, Missouri, with our partners from the Unified Government and KDOT, we've been working on this planning and environmental linkages study since fall of 2016 with the intention of having this thing wrapped up around early to mid-May. The focus of this study actually started several years ago with the need for the replacement of the current Broadway Bridge, or the Buck O'Neill Bridge, and basically this project has been expanded to make sure that whatever is planned can work in the long run with long-term plans for the North Loop of Kansas City, Missouri. What I want to do is kind of do a very brief study overview, review of the strategies developed to date, and that will be presented in a couple of weeks in a public meeting. I will give you all an update on where we are with regard to the traffic relating to some of the strategies that we're looking at, how we're evaluating these different strategies, the public meetings coming up, and then the next steps to complete the study. So, last year, we invoked and did what's called a visioning study, where we brought in people from all over the region, and we basically asked a simple question: what do you think the region should look like in about 60 years from now? We're trying to get our arms around long-term vision for downtown, and not strictly from a transportation standpoint, from a land use standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint. We surveyed a whole bunch of questions, but the bottom line was we actually saw the number one response to the public that was there was choice in travel, neighborhood character, and transportation safety for all modes was the top three that came out of that visioning. We also kind of looked at a focus between transportation on the left side and development on the right side, and the highest percentage in the number 7 median was leaning towards the development side with regard to the transportation.
So if I could ask a question, so was there a particular question or impetus to asking the question, was there a desire or a need to reclaim the space that is currently occupied by I-70 as it goes to the north?
Not to that level of detail at this initial visioning, no. A lot of people that had participated in this knew that this was not a new concept with regard to that. But at the time when we did this initial visioning, there was no concepts, there was no strategies. It was just big picture, what's your vision of downtown?
Great, thank you.
With that said, I'm sure there were members of the audience that were aware of previous studies that were done way back for probably over 20 years when this idea was first floated. And by no means is that the focus of this study, but it is certainly one of the strategies, and we'll get into that. So after that, we went through a series of development of some strategies that varied pretty far-fetched, everywhere from making the loop a one-way circulation to a series of collector distributor roadways to strategies that modified the north side of the loop strategies that might have done things with the Lewis and Clark Viaduct. And we basically narrowed the strategies down to a series of more succinct strategies that were based on the ideas of meeting the needs and the goals that we'd established for this study that will be carried forward into subsequent NEPA studies that requires a statement of purpose and need. The basic needs that were established.
You might explain NEPA.
The environmental impact statement or environmental assessments or categorical exclusions. And those are the studies that would happen subsequent to this study being completed. To back up a little bit, when we complete this planning and environmental linkages study, there will be no selected strategies that will be advanced. It was just a series of strategies that could be advanced for subsequent studies. The only study that is going to be advanced for sure is the environmental assessment for the new 169 bridge. And MoDOT is in the process right now of working on that. All the other strategies and the areas that we looked at will be basically limited to just a series of possibilities and a high-level evaluation of what they could be, but no selection will be made. But going back to the purpose and need of what will be established as part of this, all the strategies that we're looking at are the needs to improve physical condition of the infrastructure. That means, are we maintaining old roadways? Do we have to replace roadways? We want to optimize system performance, and that's predominantly from a traffic and safety standpoint, and also basically improve safety and overall security to the area. But we also have goals that we'd like to look at as far as evaluating these strategies, and those relate to transportation choices, economic vitality, and just basic overall sustainability. I know those are kind of small, hard to read, but we could, that information is available throughout documents that we provided on the website as well as throughout the rest of this study. So those are basically the benchmarks that we're using for establishing these criteria. Back in September, y'all may recall that the Urban Land Institute was convened, a national advisory panel, a technical advisory panel came in and kind of looked at the North Loop, and they did look at opportunities for development there with the strategies of either modifying I-70 or the strategy of possibly removing I-70, very high level, and it was done from an economic development standpoint and from a land use standpoint. And some of the data points that came out of there we used to kind of inform our development of the strategies that we worked on to date. So there was some consistencies in what we had worked on up till that time, and basically with some confirmation of the work that they did. Since about 2 months, up till about 2 months ago, we had about 1,700 responses online from our survey from when we first did our initial visioning and did the initial narrowing. And these are 1,700 responses to the first set of strategies that we had rolled out. And we basically saw varying degrees of acceptance for certain things and promotions of others. And we'll kind of go into the results of that. The point being made there is that we have got quite a bit of input, and we're still soliciting input, and it's rather consistent. This graphic that you have before you is going to be, we're going to revisit it again. And the purpose of this is once again to reemphasize how we evaluated the strategies from the three needs that I mentioned and the three goals that I mentioned. These are very qualitative assessments and very draft, and we're still in the process of refining this. So the point of this is that the needs and goals that are being used to assess these, and not necessarily the grading and scoring, because we're still in the process of finalizing that, particularly with input from the public coming up in the next couple of weeks. Into the bones of the study itself, we've basically taken the study area and broken it into 5 different segments of area that are kind of independent from each other. The one that we're going to be speaking about most today that's going to have the biggest impact is that with regard to the North Loop options. We did look at some options along the Lewis and Clark Viaduct. We revisited some options that were looked at several years ago when the current Lewis and Clark Viaduct study was done regarding access into the West Bottoms, but also how access could be affected by removal of the Woods Weather Viaduct that may have to happen to build the bridge in some of the locations that we're looking at. So we've looked at strategies in the North Loop area. We've looked at strategies in the West Bottoms. We've also looked at different options for the bridge. And then north of the bridge, we've looked at options for how to make better connections into the airport off of the bridge. And each of those 5 segments are independent of each other. But once again, we're focusing this study on the North Loop. What we have before you here is one of 3 of the basic strategy types for the North Loop itself. And the first one is what we're calling the access consolidation strategy. All the red ramps that you see are the existing ramps that are there today that would be removed to maintain better through movement of I-70 on the North Loop. Today we see a lot of congestion through there because of all the on-ramps and off-ramps moving through each other. And this also brings Route 9 down to grade and extends Independence Avenue basically between Grand Boulevard and Charlotte to maintain a continuous connection on the north side. This basic strategy was the concept that was actually floated and approved about 12, 13 years ago when the environmental impact statement was done for the Bond Bridge that was built. There was questions about how diversion of traffic to the Bond Bridge with a new facility would impact the North Loop. And as a result of possible traffic diversion onto I-70, this concept was developed in case traffic got so bad that they had to do something to mitigate it. So this was actually a concept that was actually floated and approved about 15 years ago. The access point to Broadway at the west end, off-ramp to Broadway going westbound, and the on-ramp from Broadway going eastbound is still maintained in here, but then all the other access points would be from the east side of the loop. A point to note when we did traffic on this, that about 40% of the traffic on the North Loop is either destined to or originating from those ramps into downtown Kansas City, Missouri, and the other 60% is through traffic. And that's actually a pretty heavy volume of traffic. So, the second strategy that we looked at was kind of similar to the first one, except we removed that ramp on the east side of Broadway, and this is the beginning of starting to possibly reclaim some land. We actually compressed the footprint of I-70 and kind of built it in a similar fashion conceptually to what a 670 is today, with some walls and then reclaiming the land on either side of it between 6th Street and between Independence Avenue on the north. And those areas in purple are possible areas for reclaimed land. We looked at this strategy from 3 different perspectives. One, and the one you see before you, which is on the existing alignment of the roadway, but we also looked at it pushing it to the south and also looked at it pushing it to the north. One of the changes in this one from the previous one that we just mentioned was on this, we're actually using Independence Avenue and converting it to a 2-way arterial boulevard on the north side, and 6th Street on the south side is converted to a 2-way arterial also. So that provides better access back and forth along both sides of the interstate with the removal of all the ramps and the connections. So that's what we're calling the compressed footprint strategy. And the third strategy, and the one that seems to have gotten the most attention from a concern standpoint, is what we call the redesignate and reclassification strategy. This is a strategy that would remove the North Loop, would maintain Independence Avenue on the north and 6th Street on the south as 2-way boulevards for maintaining local traffic. Under this strategy, the south loop would be designated as 35 and as I-70, and along the west side of the loop, 670 would basically be routed up the west side, and then the Lewis and Clark Viaduct would be designated at 670 back down to where it connects back to 70. So from a designation standpoint, under this strategy, 70 would basically be connected from one end to the other as a straight shot, straight across. But the Lewis and Clark Viaduct would still be maintained as 670 as an interstate on the interstate system. So the purple area is that area that would be reclaimed for a possible redevelopment. And Route 9 is brought down to grade as a full boulevard with full intersections at places where it's now grade separated. And the advantage to this from a land use standpoint, besides the just basic available development space, is also the reconnection of Columbus Park to the east with the River Market to the west. When they built Route 9 20, 30 years ago, that kind of severed that neighborhood. So this idea kind of brings that neighborhood back together, but also the removal of the interstate kind of brings the grid back together from the central business district back up to the River Market area.
We have a question.
Sure.
Not a question. I'll just go back on record with my major concern. This is a neat idea on the north side of the loop, but for those people who are eastbound on I-70, where the traffic at the southwest corner of the loop already backs up 2 or 3 miles on a good day, this would just really throw a whole monkey wrench into eastbound I-70 traffic.
So there's a fourth strategy that is the no-build strategy, where we do nothing. And so from this point forward in the presentation, we're really evaluating this alternative against the no-build, because the other two strategies, the access control and the compressed footprint, are really neutral to Kansas City, Kansas, and the unified government. In fact, under a couple of those, it gets a little bit better for us as far as traveling through downtown. But as you noted, this is the area of concern. So the rest of the presentation from here will focus on the difference between the no-build strategy and this strategy and the impacts, and we'll address that southwest corner in a few minutes.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, when we did run the traffic model on this, what we did is we started, and we'll actually have some simulations, and we use these models for trends. It's like flying an airplane and instruments. It's the best you have, and we rely on that for trends, not for hard numbers. The first thing we try to do is duplicate the trend that we see today, and if we can duplicate the trend we see today, it gives us some credibility and some confidence that we can somewhat project what we think it's going to happen. And when we ran the trends, exactly what you said, Commissioner, when we routed that extra traffic down there from the no-build condition in 2040 as well as 2016, we certainly saw that backup. So what we did was we actually have a couple of part of this is to widen locally 670 underneath Bartle Hall, and we'll get into the details of that. You kind of see some lines dashed through there, and we've modeled that, and we actually work with MoDOT on that. Another source of the backup, what we found out was 670, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you brought the question up, so be careful what you ask for, I like to say. 670 itself isn't the issue from a capacity standpoint. The first problem is exactly where you said. The second problem is far to the east, where all the traffic is shifting over to go to I-35 to the north, or making the decision to go to 71 to the south, and all the weaving and shifting. Exactly. So we also looked at some opportunities to reconfigure the lanes in there without spending $500 million on weaves and making ourselves look like the Gateway Project. And we actually reviewed this with MARC traffic people as well as MoDOT traffic people for concurrence with them. And at first blush, we look like we got some things that help. As I said, the end of this study, we're not going to be making any recommendations for anything. And before anything ever happens, there's going to be some technology and some things in place that are going to inform a data point at that point. But with that said, so you kind of you led right into the traffic, which is the rest of this presentation. First thing we look at is baseline 2016 conditions. We also look at the future 2040 baseline conditions of what things are going to look like. And this is based on everything that's programmed in the MARC long-range plan for 2040. And then we look at...
There's one addition to that. On the base no-build, there are some improvements they had to make just to make 2040 work, and those are included in the... There's a couple of lane additions we had to make in the loop to make 2040 work by itself. So it's 2040 no-build plus programmed and plus the absolute minimum you had to do to keep it from blowing up in 2040.
And specifically I-35 coming into and out of the loop. On 2040 right now with the programmed improvements, traffic is pretty bad on 35 because of certain constrictions to the point that it was diverting traffic totally away, unrealistically. So we actually had to make some assumptions and work with MARC on what looked like a reasonable assumption with regard to additional capacity on 35 above and beyond what's currently programmed in the long-range plan. So good point, Rob. Something else that we looked at as part of this study, and I think everyone around here at the table can appreciate this, and that is we are at that cutting edge of technology where we are actually seeing the effects of autonomous and connected vehicle technology, and how do we account for that in the planning in the long-range plans. We're already seeing people driving hands-free to a certain extent. We're seeing platooning of cars. What's the fleet going to look like in 2040? We really don't know, but we have a better idea now than we did, say, 10 years ago. So we made some assumptions with regard to how you'll hear, I'll use the term AV/CV technology will have on capacity and how we will plan traffic to make sure we don't overbuild or plan on overbuilding our infrastructure in the future. So we've also looked at 2040 no-build with that technology in place. Then we looked at 2040 with the strategies that we just put before you. And and then how 2040 with the AVCV technology could possibly affect how operations are. We did look at the AVCV technology impacts at a much more regional, holistic level, metrics there without really diving into too much detail of it because it is such an unknown, but we could look at it at least at the regional level. So to do this study effectively, we created what's called a dynamic traffic assignment model. Without getting into too much technicality, Mark has always had a regional travel demand model that it's always used for its long-range transportation plan. It's used for long-term plans of its facilities, air quality, and testing of major strategies. But for the purposes of this study, because we're looking at such possible drastic shifts and diversions in traffic, particularly for the reclassification one, we developed a very robust dynamic traffic assignment model that is built at the link level to really better evaluate how traffic will respond to some of the changes in these strategies that we looked at. And we also, we took metrics at the regional level, but we also developed metrics at that study area level as well. Because just looking at metrics at the overall regional level, sometimes we saw some what I would say diluted effects because it is weighted, and I-35 and 635 and 435, that's part of the DTA network. We didn't want the effects of those, of the travel volumes on that to affect how we look at the metrics with regard to the study area. So we kind of measured in two ways. So in conclusion, and we'll go over the details of this shortly, but in conclusion, the access consolidation strategy appears improves conditions all around. All of these improve north-south across the river because they all include a new Missouri River Bridge on US 169. So all the strategies include a new bridge with an improved connection to the West Loop as well as improved connection to downtown. So that's a given. The compressed footprint also improves conditions, but because we've eliminated that connection at Broadway, we started to see a shift in traffic to 670 and other locations. So that has some of its challenges, as you can imagine. And then, of course, to redesignate and reclassify, it also has those same north-south improvements across the river, but the diversion does result in increased congestion, and that does require capacity mitigation, as was pointed out. So we did look at some of these mitigations, and I'll share those with you, and they did incrementally improve performance in the loop area. Our congested conditions are limited to the peak hours. We actually looked at congestion over a 3.5 hour period. Actually, in the morning, we actually did a 3-hour period, in the afternoon a 4-hour period. And what we saw was at the beginning and ending of those periods, the congestion kind of dissolved itself, and we still had that half-hour, 1-hour peak. Kansas City, in a recent study, is actually 74th in the nation for congestion in urban areas during peak hour. So we do have an issue during peak. Wait 45 minutes, and it seems to go away. But being conservative, we still looked at everything in a peak hour condition. But we did find out that in 2040 that the CVAV technology on the freeway system alone can offset some of these incremental traffic delays, and we'll go over some of the numbers on that. But once again, we looked at that technology, we applied it only on the freeway system, and we looked at the metrics of how it could affect the overall system and not really at the individual link level. Some of the numbers to share with you. So this is how we're growing from 2016 to 2040, and this is before we do any of the strategies. This basically comes directly from the MARC travel demand model, and then the trips that generated in the MARC model were assigned to this dynamic traffic assignment model, so we can measure things like vehicles mile traveled, delayed, and metrics of what we call average harmonic speed. And the one I want to concentrate on is the third section down, and that's the vehicle hours of delay. So we're seeing in the morning that a system-wide total delay for the entire DTA network is anticipated to go up almost 50% between 2016 and 2040, and almost over 60% strictly on the freeways itself. And that's pretty significant. And that is before we do any of the strategies that we're talking about. That's right out of the MARC baseline projections. In the afternoon, similar characteristics, 42% increase in delay, and this is in the entire 3 to 7 hour period these are measured from. System total over 40% and close to 80% of delay on the freeways with regard to total system delay. So that's our benchmark that we're starting from with regard to growth from 2016 to 2040. So when we looked at the connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle, we took an approach with our consultant that did the DTA modeling, Cambridge Systematics, global firm that does this work, and they're actually looking at application of this technology in Los Angeles and other major urban areas. And what we did was we took the approach of adding 20% of the capacity on the existing freeway system today. So if a freeway system has, say, a typical number of about 2,000 cars per hour per lane under a free condition, we basically added 20% of that. And under the presumption that the technology will allow cars to platoon and drive closer to each other and be able to drive in a much more efficient manner, but strictly on the freeways. We took the technology and did not apply that to basically to the arterial system. So we basically assumed that once you get to the arterial system, you're going on your hands as well as going to the ramps. It's a conservative approach, but we wanted to see what those effects would be. But we did see a delay on the freeway system of from the 47% number down to 11%, and total growth in the evening period from 42 down to about 15%. So I think this is a conservative approach, and there's probably additional benefit is likely. So this is kind of the important information that Mark would use moving forward as it's developed its LRTP. Once again, this is before we do anything with the strategies.
That's the Mid-America Regional Council Long-Range Transportation Plan.
He's my interpreter, speaking acronyms. What we did was, because of the concerns regarding that reclassification and redesignation strategy, we kind of focused our analysis and this presentation because we knew that was kind of the one that had the most concern for you. So when you see the term RR, that is the strategy of removal and redesignation of the interstate system. So we looked at, this is the impact in that smaller study area, and we looked at just the afternoon period. We looked at morning, but afternoon was the worst one, so I'm just reporting that. And what we have actually found in the 2040, that 72% increase that I told you earlier actually goes to actually a 12% reduction in comparison with the no build. This is 2040 no build to 2040 build with the removal of the interstate system. System-wide total, we're still showing a net increase of about 11% in delay, but in comparison with 67% under 2040. So this is, now we're looking at what the impacts of delay are in the study area in 2040 for removal versus the no-build condition. So we're definitely seeing significant increase in congestion of about 67%, but reduced to about 11% with the CVAV technology applied to the freeway system.
So you'll note that on the previous slide where you looked at PM peak with the blue slides, the no build was 77.2% right there. And then if you go back over here to this slide, you see that the remove and reclassify without CVAV is almost exactly the same as the no build. Pretty close. With the mitigate, and that includes the mitigation strategy. So this shows that if they were to remove the north loop, the delay to those of us that drive through downtown would be the same as it would be under the no build strategy. And then if you apply the AV-CV to it, it gets better.
However,
right?
yeah, no, you said it correctly, but these are region-wide metrics. It still doesn't, we haven't answered the question yet about spot-specific locations where congestion occurs, okay? This is at the study area metric level. We did not apply, what I'm going to show you in a little while with regard to some of the mitigation strategies does not account for the CVAV technology. I think that's a little too much detail to try to project that kind of to the level of detail that we do the modeling on. But from a trend standpoint, we definitely see some advantages of the CVAV technology. And this makes a certain assumption of infiltration of the fleets and switchover of the fleets from current fleet to what's going to be happening in 2040 with regard to the technology. So the next thing we looked at was, and this is probably one of the most telling impacts with regard to downtown traffic into Kansas City, Kansas. We looked at a series of what we call gate-to-gate travel speeds, and for the purpose of reporting here, I've got two to share. The purple line is basically I-70 to the Lewis and Clark Viaduct, and then we also have the orange line, which is basically I-670 to to I-70, those two connections there, okay? The results that we have, and this is before we did any type of mitigation. This is raw data out of the traffic assignment model. And what we'll do is we'll kind of look at 2040 as a base condition, what I would call the no build, and the reclassification. And probably one of the biggest impacts that we're seeing is I-670 eastbound to I-70 eastbound, the third line down in the afternoon. Today's time to make that trip is about 6 minutes and 14 seconds. And we're seeing that going by almost 4 minutes of delay, 10 minutes and 6 seconds as a result of the phenomena of basically forcing all that traffic on through the Bartle Hall, underneath Bartle Hall and that piece there. So that's a very telling piece of information there. We also saw that the eastbound Lewis and Clark Viaduct to eastbound I-70 in the afternoon goes from 4 minutes and 46 to 9 minutes and 53 seconds. So there's a couple of big delays there, okay? The one in the morning, or morning and afternoon, there's two sources of delay. The source of delay from eastbound 670 to eastbound 70, it has to go through both of those two choke points. We have the choke point at the east end as well as the choke point on the west end. But you can see there is definitely some trends there where traffic is definitely being affected. So there's three basic constraints that we found that we saw relief, and I'll concentrate on two of them. The first one is that choke point underneath Bartle Hall, where there's basically 3 lanes on I-670 eastbound. A fourth lane comes up from the Wyoming interchange. That lane is committed to I-35. The third lane is also committed to I-35. The second lane is the only lane that goes through from I-670, and then the fourth lane on the inside or the first lane is actually committed to go up Central Avenue, and that's a choke point, because what's happening is you have a lot of weaving and movements of folks coming up from the right, and you have a lot of folks on the left side that are trying to avoid that, but they get to that point where they have to move over, or they get stuck going up Central Avenue. So that's the first choke point we looked at. And the other choke point is at the east end, where there is an interior lane on the left that is shared to go up I-35 to the north, and a lane on the exterior where Grand Boulevard actually comes in eastbound onto 670, and it goes down to 71 Highway. So those folks have a very short distance to merge over to get onto 70, and as many as 3 lanes if those folks want to go up to I-35. So those two choke points together is what contributes to a lot of the delay, not the fact that there's not enough lanes on 670 itself. We also found a choke point on northbound on I-35, where when we look at some of the strategies to get up to the new bridge, extension of the northbound on-ramp from 12th Street gave us a lot of relief with regard to that movement, but it really didn't do that much with regard to that movement going continuously to the Lewis and Clark Viaduct. But nonetheless, it was still a strategy in the overall scheme of things that we've incorporated. So that basically explains the existing condition that we have today. And do you want to do simulations now, or just wait till the end? We'll do them all at the end. Okay. So what we proposed here, and we've cleared this with MoDOT, and we've talked to Federal Highway Administration, and we would definitely need some design exceptions to do this with regard to shoulder and clearance widths, but basically keep that inside lane as a through lane up underneath Bartle Hall, and we still have the merge to make, but that merge would be occurring well downstream of where the merging happens upstream at I-35. And we would still pull a divergent lane directly right off to go to I call it Wyandotte, but that's actually Central, so pardon the typo there. So that movement is still there, but you're not trapped in that lane. You just have to be in that lane, and you split off to do that. So that's the first mitigation point, and we'll show the effects of the traffic on that and how it affects the eastbound 670. That's when we modeled it up, that's basically how we put it in the travel demand model. So that green, or in the traffic operations model, is extension of that lane up underneath the Bartle Hall. The other point that I mentioned was at the east end, that I'll go from the bottom up. That bottom lane goes Grand. It goes directly to 71 Highway. Those folks have to move over at least one lane to stay on 70. The 2 lanes after that are 670 to 70, and then the 3rd lane on the top is committed to 35 northbound or I-70 eastbound. Okay. Now here's where the plot thickens. If under the strategy for the removal, I-35 would be designated on the south side of the loop, as would I-70. All I-35 northbound traffic would have to shift over at least 2 lanes of traffic to make that move to get all the way over there to I-35, and that's an issue. So we looked at some reconfigurations of the lanes. What we did was we took that, going from the south up, we took the lane coming off of Grand and made that a what we call a decision lane to either stay on 70 or to go 71 southbound. So those folks don't have to move over if they want to stay on 70. The next lane is still committed to 70. The 3rd lane is 35 to 70 as a decision lane, and then that 4th lane is also 35 in and of itself, a committed lane. But under this strategy, folks coming up 35 from Johnson County that want to continue up north only have to move over 1 lane to get onto I-35 and make that movement. Conversely, folks coming in on the left lane that merged in underneath Bartle Hall on 670, they still have to move over 1 lane to stay on 70. So there's still 1 lane shift requirement, but it beats the heck out of what's out there today. So from a lane continuity standpoint, it's not perfect. But we've demonstrated solid traffic or improved traffic improvements under this. The other option is to build what's called structured braided ramps, which would cost
there's not room.
Gross national product. It would be a very expensive and unreasonable application of funds, and we'll go over the results of this.
The other possibility there is that they're talking about closing the on-ramp from Grand, which would make that better as well.
We could actually close the Grand Avenue on-ramp, but that's the only way out to eastbound 70 or 35 out of the Crown. Even folks from Crown Center come up that way, the Crossroads District. Even folks out in the north side of the loop actually cross over to Truman and they get on that way. If we were to close that, because Truman is a 6-lane road, it would send folks up to the Paseo, and then folks that want to go 35 north would have to go to the Paseo and up north, or to go south to go on 71 Highway. It is an option. There's plenty of capacity on Truman. It was actually MoDOT that made that suggestion as a possibility. We did not test it, but it's a secondary possibility that could happen in other studies. That's how we basically showed it in our model, and we'll go over the simulation. So the results of that, it did not bring us back to the no-build condition, but we definitely saw improvement. The biggest piece of improvement in the afternoon at that 670 one that I just showed you, we went from 10 minutes and 6 seconds from 6:14 to 10:06, or about a 4-minute delay. We cut into that to decreasing that delay from 6:14 to about 7:17, or about 1 minute. Okay, so we did show a definite marked improvement there. And we also dropped a couple minutes on the eastbound Lewis and Clark Viaduct down to eastbound I-70. And that's, once again, that's because of that southeast corner mitigation that we did. We take that from 9:53 down to 7:51. Now, granted, it's still 3 minutes more delay, but we've cut into it quite a bit. But this does not account for, like I said, the possibility of continuous vehicle and autonomous vehicle technology. But we have demonstrated a significant amount of improvement on that when we ran the traffic models on it, and we think that these are actually pretty conservative numbers. There's a good chance that it would be better than that. Coming out of this study, we're not making any recommendations. This is just a data point with regard to this. Because we did see the what I call the bang for our buck on these, both of these strategies at both ends is about $1 million each. By the time we do an overlay, restripe, and some overhead signage that would have to be done. But for the benefits of it, that we actually included that as part of this strategy, the removal strategy. Moving into the completion of the study, we've developed a very detailed evaluation matrix, and that matrix, the traffic that I showed before you is only one piece of that matrix. The traffic is part of the need to optimize system performance, but we also are looking at other things regarding infrastructure, land use, quality of life, sustainability, transportation choices, and we broke our matrix into each of the 5 segments. And we have quantitative measures where we can measure stuff: costs, traffic, safety from a standpoint of removal of connection and what I call conflict points. And then in other places we have qualitative measures where we kind of did a subjective view of opinion of what we think one is better than the other with regard to meeting a specific need or goal. And it's just for comparison. And the intention here is not to read that. Don't even try. But the point being, the point being is, don't even try. Is this pointer here?
No, it's the red dot.
What we have are the needs. So we have our 3 basic needs that I went over, and our 3 goals, and we actually have feasibility cost. And for each of the needs and for each of the goals, we actually have subsets in that. Okay. So we've gone through a very comprehensive scoring of this, and these are not weighted. We did not weight anything, okay? So we just kind of did the numbers as they are, and then the little beige areas are those measures that we saw would differentiate one particular strategy from another, because some of these was a wash. So we kind of picked out those that kind of differentiated. So the intent was to basically take that and to kind of roll it up into what we call a Harvey Ball qualitative, more or less, measure with regard to how these strategies measured up to each other in relative comparison. And we as a team and the study management team just reviewed this earlier this week. It's still a work in progress. These values are by no means final. We'll give the public an opportunity to provide their input, because like I said, these are qualitative and these are based on no weighting. So depending on how you weight any particular sub-strategy, you can certainly come up with different values of this. So we are by no means married to these at this time.
And I've suggested a few ways that might be modified already.
Pardon?
I've suggested to you a few ways that this ought to be modified already.
So we're taking input on this right now. So there's positives for some, there's negatives for some. If we saw that a particular strategy had absolutely no redeeming features with regard to meeting goals or meeting needs, and we screened them out, and we did that in a preliminary screening several months ago. So these are the remaining ones that are in there. At the end of this study, this is all that's going to be part of the planning environmental linkages, and we will complete one of these for each of the 5 segments that I reviewed. This is only but the North Loop that we're looking at right now. We've also done one for the bridge. We're doing one for the West Bottoms access. We're doing one for the different ways of connecting up to Route 9, as well as the different interchange strategies to connect into the downtown airport. So this study covers a lot of area, but the focus of this presentation.
And I would say, related to the screening out process, the decision point for us is whether or not we would ask them to screen out the remove the North Loop option. And that would be where I see we have a decision that is potentially detrimental to us if the CVAV doesn't come through.
So to that point, Rob, so it seems to me, what I understand of traffic studies that have been done, it's usually trying to find ways to reduce delays and to handle increased volume of traffic, rather than to examine options that, from what I can tell, except for no build and improvement with connected and autonomous vehicles, that's the only one that actually would reduce that, unless we did some other major changes. I guess I'm coming back to the original question, is what else is generating this? Because it doesn't seem to me that this is actually improving traffic flow.
That's why this study is different. When we first started this study with the Mid-America Regional Council and we did our very first traffic review, one of the first comments we got from the traffic people at Mid-America Regional Council was, well, except for the access consolidation strategy, none of these do anything to improve traffic from what we have. And given the nature, I think we're starting to learn that, building ourselves out of congestion and more or less kind of learning and living with technology and different lifestyles and different places of how we live and commute, traffic is but one a need, or if you will, on this without a need of improving what's out there today. That was an objective that was basically part of kind of the ground rules that we set, or that the Mid-America Regional Council set with MoDOT and with KCMO, and we started doing this, that the fact that we're not improving what's out there today is not necessarily a total detriment to a strategy. And it used to be we would just build our way out and we look for level service D and that was it. And if we didn't accomplish that. So this is a different study in that respect. But to your point and to Rob's point, before any of these strategies would garner your support or KDOT support, because KDOT and Federal Highway Administration have expressed similar concerns, secondary impacts and other impacts would have to be considered before anything would be advanced any further. And those studies would be done as part of what we call the NEPA, the environmental assessment or the environmental impact, because we did see spots in traffic that kind of backed up areas. You know, we saw what I call hot spots, and those are secondary impact on traffic. And those would certainly have to be addressed in much more detail than the high level that we did for this planning and environmental linkages study. But until the Kansas City, Missouri, or MoDOT decides to do something significant with the interstate system, those studies will happen then. And the study could be reopened and revisited, or depending on where we are with regard to implementation of the long-range plan and technology on traffic, they could use part of this study, they could use quite a bit of this study, they could start all over again. This basically sets the framework for future studies.
But again, to kind of come back, since this is, the purpose of the study is not trying to find ways to alleviate traffic congestion or build our way out, it means that there's another set of values that's at work here. And based upon this third slide, thinking about the next 60 years, how would you prioritize the following issues in the study area? Number one was travel choices, that is driving, transit, biking, walking. Second is neighborhood character. So, and third is transportation safety for all modes. But it seems to me those first two is really more about how do you build a walkable city. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the value that is driving this study. And this study then is presenting options to how to accommodate that goal. Is that accurate?
Very well said.
Okay.
One thing that I did not mention, and we can go back to the strategies, is you made a great point. And this is a different study, and I'm a traffic guy. I'm a transportation guy. So it took me a while to get my arms around the fact that we are not seeing significant improvements in traffic. As a matter of fact, we're looking at communities right now in Rochester and parts of Detroit where they're actually taking the interstate out. They're doing the same thing in Seattle right now with the Alaska Viaduct. And people are figuring out where to go. But on the other hand, the idea here isn't just close the North Loop and then let people figure it out. There still has to be some mitigation, without a doubt. But on this strategy, one thing that you see on here, just north of Independence Extension, is a two-way cycle track, and that two-way cycle track connects up to a cycle track that's actually on the east side of Route 9, and Route 9 goes up to the existing Heart of America. Right now has a trail on it right now, and North Kansas City is developing a plan to give Burlington a road diet from 6 lanes to 4 lanes, counting on the diversion of traffic from Burlington to the heart of to the new bridge, and they are going to use that space to build a cycle track there. The other thing that's being planned right now, there's little red icons to the north. Right now, the ATA is planning a rapid transit on Independence Avenue, taking off, serving basically to the east of the loop, and the reconnection of the grid and extension of Independence and converting it to two-way provides that expansion of the ATA system as well. So that plays to your point there.
So you just said in a different way that what we're really talking about is for the folks who live in that locality, in those neighborhoods, what was taken from them when I-70 was built in the North Loop is the intent is to restore that. So now we have a neighborhood again.
I think it's beyond that. I mean, there's a lot of economic development opportunity. They want to connect downtown to the river market.
Well, sure, but I mean, it still is about how those people who live there experience that area.
Correct.
And how they experience it now is they've got this canyon running through that is not accessible easily by walking. It's not easily accessible by biking. And even with some of the, with the streetcar and some other options, this is really another, a grand attempt then to address that. Commissioner.
However, if from a
I'm not opposed to that. I'm just
Oh, no, but I'm, it's funny me being devil's advocate here, because usually Rob's my devil's advocate. And we've had a great relationship.
They would never understand that would happen with me.
Yeah.
I think we could take a vote on that.
We temper each other. If the closure of the loop from a traffic standpoint is really not determined to be feasible, and this study doesn't determine what is and isn't truly technically feasible. Right now, we're just kind of dreaming. What we call the compressed footprint strategy is kind of the next best thing. We still have space available. We still reconnect the grid. One thing that came out of this study was just reconnecting Columbus Park to the east with the River Market and bringing Route 9 down to grade. That, plus the space available for that, that in and of itself could be incorporated. That actually could be incorporated with very simply under this strategy, which is the access consolidation. So actually, if we build the bridge first, we collectively, community, build the bridge first, we live with that, the next step could be going to this access consolidation and bringing Route 9 down. We've demonstrated how we can reconnect the grid. Yeah, the convenience of being able to get right off the interstate into the River Market, you might have to drive a mile on an arterial system to get there, but people do that. So from a phasing standpoint, we could go from the bridge to this to possibly either this or this, but from a phased implementation standpoint, we're just kind of setting the stage for what could happen. So in the design of the bridge, if I may, the design of the bridge that's going to be started in the next couple of years, the MoDOT is in the process right now selecting a consultant for the environmental assessment. They want to make sure that whatever interchange is designed for the bridge coming into downtown doesn't preclude any of these opportunities. They're not going to set the stage for a particular one, but they're not going to preclude any of them as well.
Okay. I think it would be a mistake to assume that even on the Kansas City, Missouri side, there aren't any concerns, because this dumps a lot of traffic onto the arterial street system, which might require them to rebuild a tremendous number of traffic signals at great cost that's not federally eligible. And so there's a lot of concern about the remove and replace all around, but it also has a lot of interesting advantages. And so the decision to screen it out now is kind of an important one, if you do or you don't. And I would say that given our time, we ought to probably, after this question, move to the simulation so you can kind of see how the traffic really works at those choke points.
So this is really somewhat rhetorical, but do KDOT and MoDOT ever talk to each other? Because
yes.
KDOT embarks on this multi-year plan for Lewis and Clark, which results in a multi-year, multi-million-dollar plan, and then it appears from the outside that we're closing the north side of the loop anyway. So it appears from the outside to someone who doesn't do these studies and study this stuff that there is no communication, that we're not planning together around this north-south thing called the state line.
Mr. Sheikovitz is retiring in a month. I'm going to let him answer that one.
I could say anything now. What are you going to do, fire me? No, I appreciate that. Actually, they communicate a lot more than meets the eye, and you're not the first person I've heard say that, and MoDOT and KDOT have both heard it. But when you say that KDOT embarked on this plan to reconstruct the Lewis and Clark Viaduct, and then MoDOT's going to say, well, that's okay, we're going to close. First of all, they're not going to close the north side of the loop. What we're seeing here, the possibility to close the north side of the loop, probably, if it was to come to fruition, would be well beyond 10 years into the future at least. And that's after the subsequent studies and the planning and everything is done. MoDOT, and I know that they had talked quite a bit during the planning of the Lewis and Clark Viaduct along with Kansas City, Missouri, because a lot of the detours routes that's being used to rebuild the Lewis and Clark Viaduct is on their system, and they work very closely together with each other. It's my understanding on the Lewis and Clark, that was strictly a structural situation on that. The bridge, from a structural standpoint, just had to be taken down. Now, to digress a little bit, when we first started this study, there was a rumor that was circulated that this study was going to recommend dropping the Lewis and Clark Viaduct to grade as well. And it was just going to turn into an arterial on the street with bikes and things on it, and that was a rumor that was started. It was never ever part of this study. Lewis and Clark was always to be maintained as part of the interstate system. As a matter of fact, under the strategy of the removal, it's that much more important that it has to still stay to maintain interstate access into downtown. But designated as 70 instead of, it would be swapped out. So there were those types of rumors that were out there too, that first we're going to drop the north side of the loop and then we're going to drop Lewis and Clark Viaduct, and that was just never ever part of the study as well.
It wasn't part of this study, but it was definitely on plans that I've seen that were not part of this study.
Yeah, but not part of this study. It got tied to this study initially, and we dissuaded that immediately.
All right. We should probably run the simulations.
Want to do it? Okay, so. All right, so where's the server? Well, I see the folder. There it is. Okay, so everything that you're going to see are based on 2040 projections of traffic. Fortunately, the difference between 2016 and 2040 in the immediate area of the loop, the growth isn't huge. It's significant. It's probably 20–25%, but it's not like the explosion of growth that we're seeing in Johnson County. But we still, nonetheless, this is still all 2040 traffic. So this is no build at the Bartle Hall area in 2040, and that's pretty close to what we see today. This is in the morning, so this simulation, the morning is actually worse than the evening from what we saw incrementally. So one thing that's absent from this simulation, just from a budgeting and from a time standpoint, is we do not have the traffic coming up out of Wyoming that's merging over there and going down into 35. That kind of adds to this a little bit. What we concentrated on here was the folks that are coming in on 670 and those folks that are in the left lane that get trapped and have to get over to maintain their movement underneath Bartle Hall and then merge with the rest of the 35 traffic that's coming in. So the focus of this is where that backup occurs almost to the end of the bluffs there, okay? That, I think we can kind of reconcile that. Now, day to day it varies. I mean, I drive the loop a different way depending on what lane I'm in when I get there. I mean, there's so much redundancy in the system. But generally speaking, this is a pretty good replication. So if I can get out of this. So then, now let's create Armageddon. So now, to your point, Commissioner, we've routed all that traffic from the Lewis and Clark Viaduct that would have normally gone up and come down. Now they're going straight across. The folks that typically would have gone on I-70, typically the folks that were going to on I-70 are still here. The majority of this diversion of traffic are the folks that would have probably gone to 35. Because the folks that would go up and go eastbound on I-70 and then come back down again, they're probably going to come across 670 anyway. But the biggest diversion here is the folks that would have gone up 35. But now you can see that traffic really backing up.
It backs up past Genesee.
And this is a video. When we actually run the 1 hour simulation of this, we have times where it backs almost back up to Central. It kind of ebbs and flows just like real traffic. We just did a 60-second screen capture here. So once again, you can kind of see that traffic. And once again, that Genesee coming in would only make this even worse. So we played the game of adding those lanes, like I mentioned, underneath Bartle Hall. And as I explained to Rob, we did not do anything except just add the lanes in here. We did not change any of the parameters. Our credibility as traffic engineers and professionals, we could change this thing to make it do whatever we want. That's not what the intention of this is. So by adding that simple lane through there, we still get the occasional folks stopping, and if you look, you will see occasionally someone will get stuck in that lane, in the right lane, that wants to go to the left. But we really open that up quite a bit. So this is under 2040 traffic. Now, we're still showing time delays overall from the model, but we look at this, you say, well, there shouldn't be any delay at all. Realistically, there's still going to be other delays from other factors besides this location here. So the sum total of that 4-minute delay that I showed you, this is just one component of it. And this component drops, we're showing them up to maybe 2 minutes. Okay, so that's the first mitigation. And then the other one we looked at, for the purpose of this is at the southeast corner. This is at 670. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. Yep, that's no build. So you kind of see the folks coming out right there southwest of Sprint Center. That's that that ramp from Grand that's kind of dumping all the people on, and every now and then you'll get someone that'll go to the end. If your eyes are good enough, you could actually watch, and every now and then someone will stop there and jump across 3 lanes of traffic. Okay, and what we do is when we develop these models, we want to calibrate them to real life conditions, and we can actually change the parameters, because if I put this traffic in, say, Los Angeles or Boston, where more aggressive drivers are, we wouldn't see this phenomena. So we actually have factors in there that reflect the type of drivers that we have in the Midwest. The type of folks that I'm going to go to the end and then cut people off, or I'm going to merge back here. So there's a lot of thought that goes into these modeling, and also how the signage is, how much advanced signage have we given folks with regard to information, and then how they process that information. That all goes into these models. But this is kind of what we're seeing in the afternoon. Would one agree? Okay, so then then we closed the North Loop and routed traffic all through it. Okay, so now this is all that traffic that is on 35 that normally would have gone up the west side of the loop and gone over the north side of the loop and gone to 35. Well, now all these folks coming in from Johnson County and coming from the southwest side of the loop have to jump over 2 lanes of traffic to make that movement to get to that 1 lane to go up I-35. Okay, so it's even worse. So now I think you can kind of appreciate the idea of closing that ramp and sending folks out on Independence Avenue possibly. And granted, for those folks, it would be some inconvenience. We had not evaluated that as part of this strategy, but it is suggested it is a secondary strategy that could be considered, beyond this study. So going back to that reconfiguration of the lanes, such that now we took the left lane and made it a committed lane to 35, but the lane next to that we made what we call the shared lane. So now it's a double lane that's going around now. So I've got 2 lanes coming around 35 and merging to 1. And if the North Loop is removed, we would actually have space on that ramp, because that to merge that traffic, because we don't have to worry about the lane that's coming around to the north side of the loop. And then we also committed this lane on the outside to not just go down 71, but to also be able to make the decision to go to 70. So there's a lot less lane shifts in doing this. And once again, we're seeing under 2040 traffic and the diversion, we're seeing much better traffic operations. And once again, I'm not sitting here saying, blowing sunshine, saying this is the catch-all, fix-all, but in sharing this with MoDOT, both of these are strategies that they could implement next week, with funding and money and time, of course, that they would get an immediate benefit from. So like I said, the intention is, well, we could do this and shut down the north side of the loop. That is not what we're trying to say here, but we do have some ideas of what to mitigate. There are traffic spots, if you were to look at our results of the metrics, that into KCK, we're moving some of the traffic that we're seeing right now that's happening because of the westbound Lewis and Clark Viaduct. There is some mitigation that would still have to happen above and beyond this to basically satisfy everybody before this strategy.
One of the things that this doesn't show, and if you drive eastbound on I-70 very much, there's a lot of traffic coming from the north that's coming I-70 this way, and there's a double merge over here from 3529 coming to I-70 eastbound. And so that merge out here that actually slows down out here at Paseo would actually be mitigated by this as well. So you might be a little more choked here, but you're going to get relief on this side a little bit that you don't have today that's not shown on this. But
and there is one, to that point, that outside lane on 70 does drop at Paseo. So it's a trap lane. So there is a little more congestion that's happening on the east side here, but that congestion doesn't really spill back into this area of influence here. But
it does that today. That's
today.
Still a trap lane today, and so is Cleveland.
Right. So there's some lane usage but the point of this is, by reconfiguring some lanes and not just by widening 670, we feel comfortable saying there is a measurable amount of mitigation that would occur. It does not, nothing sets us back to the no-build condition. But as we said, as part of this study, this is not strictly to mitigate and improve conditions we have. This project is not to fix the whims of the world, but basically to look at a lot of factors with regard to Kansas City, the North Loop, and how it relates to possibilities with the Broadway Bridge and long-term plans. So,
One last thing I would say that needs to be considered with these strategies is we all know that if there's an accident on the south side, we all go around the north side. Or if there's an accident on the north side, we can all go around the south side. That option goes away when you take the north loop out. So if there are accidents, we have to be better about clearing them and getting people out of the way. But we also are reducing weaves and things that cause accidents in some of these as well. So when we're considering whether or not we ask them to screen or not screen this alternative out from our community standpoint, those, I think Ron's covered everything except that one part about there's not an alternative way through.
Okay. Any further questions or comments?
Well, let me wrap up the presentation with the final slide. We are moving towards the end of this study. In the month of March, we have a whole bunch of ongoing stakeholder meetings, presentations. As a matter of fact, I'm presenting next week to the Fairfax Industrial Association at their lunch. The week of March 16th through the 22nd, we are planning a series of public charrettes, public meetings. You are certainly welcome to come and participate. We will be planning on completing this study by early to mid-May, and that includes defining what we call segments of independent utility, different segments that independent studies could be done. And of course, that first one is ongoing right now, and that's the Buck O'Neill Bridge. The timeline for that is tentatively 2022 timeframe. Very, very, very aggressive schedule on that. As you know, MoDOT is going to be starting a project this summer to do about a 5-year rehabilitation on that bridge to get 5 more years of life out of it while the proposal to design and build the bridge takes place. The next thing that could possibly happen after that is maybe the extension of Independence Avenue and that Route 9, the implementation of that. We don't know when that's going to happen, as we don't know when the North Loop and the advanced NEPA studies for that is going to happen. So that's the timeline of things that are going on. So.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Rob.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
That ends our special session. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock in the commission chambers.